So, an interesting thing happened recently. An important, yet divisive and controversial thing. Yep, the Game Awards announced all their nominees for their various categories of their video game award show, and opened up voting to the public, and with it, the usual hubbub followed. Once again, like any other year, what was nominated, particularly for Game of the Year, was particularly divisive, and has people unhappy. And normally, you just chalk it all up to differing opinions and leave it at that. However, what's quite notable about this year's Game of the Year nominees is the fact that one of them is a DLC expansion, Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree. And that, well, it changes things. A DLC, even as big and expansive as Shadow of the Erdtree, can now potentially win Game of the Year. Is that fair? Does it make sense? Those are the questions that have been hotly debated and talked about in the online discourse surrounding video games recently, and likely will continue to be discussed until the Game Awards show is done and over with. To the point of a DLC being Game of the Year, certain people, the judge panel for the Game Awards for instance, are for the idea, while certain people are against it, as you'd expect from something like this. Complicating matters, however, is the fact that this change, happening this year, definitely calls into question previous years, where other major DLC expansions also didn't get a chance or a shout out. So, why now? Is it because the DLC in question is Shadow of the Erdtree? Or is this the new normal going forward? Well, if you want my take, and a simple answer to the question of whether a DLC or expansion should be able to win Game of the Year, then the simple answer is no. To me, it doesn't matter what DLC is being nominated. I just don't believe that DLC or expansions should even be able to be in the discussion for Game of the Year. And I think I've got a few valid reasons to that position. So, let me expand upon that, and really just lay out why I think this choice to allow a DLC, no matter how good, is a mistake, and what it means and represents for the appreciation and discourse surrounding video games. Now, it's worth noting that Shadow of the Erdtree itself is no stranger to controversy, as we covered quite extensively in the video about it on the channel. In that video, while I personally listed my issues with the game, I also totally got why, for a good chunk of From Software fans at least, the game was not only great, but could easily become their Game of the Year. And look, Game of the Year is kind of a weird thing in itself. Everyone has different preferences and tastes for one. For two, no one, even if it's a reviewer or content creator, can really ever play every game that comes out in a year, even the major ones. So, there's already a case for certain games getting shafted for various reasons that may have nothing to do with how good they actually are. And let me state, for the record, that I have no issue with someone claiming or saying that they personally think of Shadow of the Erdtree as their Game of the Year. Everyone has their own opinions, tastes, and ideas for what should constitute Game of the Year. And no one has a right to say anything to that particular person. But when it comes to talking about video games as a collective, as an industry, as an award show, then things really do need to change. Even if you question the legitimacy of Jeff Keighley's Game Awards show, I still think it matters what gets nominated for Game of the Year at the industry's biggest and most notable Game Awards show, especially when the nominations happen as a result of a panel of judges that have been formed from all of the major press outlets and content creators that cover video games. So then, what is the issue with a DLC or expansion winning Game of the Year exactly? Well, for one, I think there's the issue of access. Getting access to a DLC, generally means that you have to play or at least be familiar with the original game in some form or another. What that means is that basically a lot of the heavy lifting to establish the story, world, game structure, core gameplay systems and mechanics, the tone, the style, that's all on the base game to provide and handle. And while I get that there are DLCs not like Shadow of the Erdtree, where you can access them without playing the base game, I think in that particular case, even if the ability to access the DLC in a standalone fashion is there, the fact that the DLC exists at all has to do with some success that the base game had. But hey, let's say you disagree with this whole access angle. There's a much bigger issue that I think just really hammers the idea home of why DLC should not be Game of the Year eligible. And that has to do with what kind of message it sends the larger video game industry and the game developers within it. Game of the Year is the highest award and honor that a game can reasonably get. It's the best thing that's come out this year, and arguably does everything better than all the other competition in its sphere. A DLC or expansion, by its very nature, is already going to fall short in a lot of ways, thanks to what it just is, an extension of an already existing game, as we said before. A DLC, in terms of scope, originality, risk, and effort, can never ever ever match a brand new, distinct game. Yet, as consumers and fans of video games, and as an industry, what we're saying here is that new games and DLC expansions are comparable as products and pieces of entertainment. Are Elden Ring's base game and Shadow of the Erdtree equal comparable products? I don't think any reasonable person is going to say that they are, no matter how much they may love Shadow of the Erdtree. And as an industry, as fans of video games, I just don't think it's healthy for us, as consumers or fans, to reward DLCs to the same degree as a standalone original game. I'd much rather that some other great game from this year, of which there are many, get Shadow of the Erdtree's spot and consideration. That doesn't say anything about how good or bad Shadow of the Erdtree is, by the way, but it's more about saying what we value and what we respect more as fans and people who follow and participate in the video game industry. And really, what I want from Software, the makers of Shadow of the Erdtree, is for them to make new, exciting, and interesting products. If a DLC they make, no matter how expansive and content-rich, ends up not only doing great commercially, but also gains recognition and awards, then you can bet your farm that the business people behind them are going to push for more DLC and less big, original, and expansive games. DLCs are inherently less risky, after all. And look, for those worried that DLC, like Shadow of the Erdtree, or Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, or the Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed DLC, that those things aren't being appreciated or rewarded, well, that's what a separate category of DLC or expansion of the year should exist for. DLCs can be really interesting, great, and refined additions and expansions to their original games. Doing that well should be rewarded, applauded, and celebrated. It just shouldn't come at the expense of newer, bigger, and more original games. And in the end, that is what I hope we all want. More original games, more experiences that impress us, blow us away, and do things that we didn't dream possible. I want more Elden Rings, more Metaphor ReFantasios, more Stellar Blades, and I want more Shadow of the Erdtree, Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, etc. And that's only possible when we reward the things for what they are and compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges in this case. Now, having said all of that, as always, my opinions are only a small part of the discussion. Tell me what you think about all this. Do you agree? Disagree? I really want to hear what fans of video games and the people who, like myself, really care about video games and the medium, what they have to say about all this. So, if you're one of those people, sound off in the comments. And as with every video on this channel, we'll continue the discussion there.